When Donald Trump came down that escalator 9 years ago and referred to Mexican immigrants as, quote, rapists and drug dealers, you wouldn't be crazy for assuming that his path to Latino votes would be quite the uphill climb. But the Latino voting bloc isn't a monolithic bloc at all. And now, in yet another campaign full of anti-immigrant rhetoric, Latino Trump voters might actually swing this election. By the way, this shouldn't be surprising. Yes, Democrats still take a majority of the Latino vote. In 2016, they won about 68% of Hispanic voters, according to the New York Times. But Democratic support among Latinos slipped to 62% in 2020, and now it hovers around the mid-50s range. And that has some Democrats hitting the panic button and Republicans cheering. And you can understand why. Latinos are the largest minority group in the U.S. and one of the fastest growing. So despite all the terms that group them together, they're incredibly diverse with ties to more than 20 countries and territories, an intricate mix of identities and politics. It's complicated. Está complicado, which is why, for example, did you like that, Tony?
I did. Thank you. I knew that one.
That was a translation for you. Which is why most Mexican and Puerto Rican Americans favor Vice President Harris, but most Cuban Americans prefer Donald Trump. And let's linger for a second on the American part of those identities. Millions of Latino families are generations deep in this country. And indeed, a recent Pew survey found that nearly 1 in 5 Latino Americans say they primarily identify as simply American. So the question is, how do the campaigns navigate the Latino electorate, and how much sway will Latinos have on Election Day?
Here's a preview. It's going to be a big amount of sway here. We're going to talk about it with a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist, Leslie Sanchez. Leslie, thank you very much for being here. I'm so glad that Adriana did that breakdown, because we talk about the Latino vote or the Hispanic vote as though it's just one block of people, and it is so diverse and so interesting and very hard to predict how they're going to vote. What do we know at this point about how Latino voters overall could swing the election?
I love that breakdown, too, in terms of the diversity of locations. So geography is driving a lot of these shifts. If you look at Texas, for example, in 2020, Donald Trump was able to win some of these blue districts and precincts that were along the U.S.-Mexico border by 55 points. It was a swing you hadn't seen in 100 years. And people thought, that's such an anomaly. Is it just Donald Trump related? And actually, we found it's economic related. As more and more Latinos, particularly Mexican-American men, were moving into the middle class, they were much more concerned about the economy, the rising cost, inflation impact, and border security. Donald Trump has leaned into that Hispanic shift, and you're seeing this spread like wildfire, not only in red states like Texas, but across those Sun Belt states, why Arizona is competitive, Nevada, North Carolina, and that's going to be the big predictor and why the Democrats are really sounding the alarm.
Well, there is this narrative that Latinos care most about immigration, and the polls show time and time again that's simply not true. Like you said, the economy is number 1, healthcare is number 2, violent crime is number 3, 4 is gun policy, and then immigration is ranked 5 in a recent survey. So how do you think Donald Trump is capitalizing off that? And what is Harris trying to do to win over some of the Latino voters that she's lost? I mean, Latinos went for Barack Obama by 70% in 2012, and now it's down to the mid-50s.
Absolutely. You're seeing a 29-point drop if you look historically since 2012. And the Democrats are like, well, what does that mean? So there's 2 things to break down. One, Republicans don't need to win the Latino vote, but this is the first time in 40 years they're competitive. And the changes, economic and political dynamics, and people would say a realignment. The country's angry. There's not one party in control. There's a lot of intensity around that.
And you say there's a 40-year cycle that happens?
About every 40 years, political scientists will come and say there's a big political realignment. Last one you saw was 1980s, when you saw the southern states, and it was the country pretty much went 50-50. Now there's this new one with working class voters, non-Hispanic, white, and Latino, and you could argue African-American men as well. Anybody in that working class, that growing middle class, feels left behind. They're disconnected, they're upset, and if you think about Trump's messages, he's leaning into that economic dissatisfaction with the Biden administration or with the Biden policies, and that's where the opportunity arises.
So I got really into this topic, and I looked up the exit polls from the 80s. Reagan is thought to have gotten about 1/3 of Hispanic voters, but then he gave a speech where he said they're all actually Republicans. They don't realize it yet, but they're socially conservative. They care about security. And now it seems like Donald Trump's capitalizing on that. And he's benefiting from the fact that this population just keeps getting bigger. I was really struck by the fact that there's been 4 million new eligible Latino voters since 2020 alone. Talk about just the scale.
It's just astounding. In the last few years, it has doubled in terms of the number of Latino registered voters on the right and the left. So what's going to change? You've got new voters, right, who don't follow the legacy of their parents. You could argue the Cuban American population in Florida, South Florida, they're not like their grandparents. They have their own kind of economic ideas. Second, you have more second, third, fourth generation across that Sun Belt and moving through the Midwest. Their sensibility is a lot more like what you talked about. They consider themselves Americans, just like Eastern European immigrants. We're American, we see it as American, and the strains on the economy, whether our community is small or large, rural or urban, is the same.
Like it's said a lot in South Texas, as you know, from Corpus Christi. A lot of people say, we didn't cross the border crossed us. So people feel deeply American in a lot of Latino communities. So what does each campaign need to do to target these Latino voters, the few of them that can still be persuadable?
The dividing line is going to be interesting. What I'd be watching is Donald Trump going to reach over that 40%? If he's 40%, or actually any Republican candidates hit that low 40s, it's going to be making a difference. And he's talking about it: immigration, rising prices, border security. On the Harris side, it's turning out a lot of those urban areas, particularly Latinas. That's the growth and the steadfast nature of the Democratic Party in the urban centers: healthcare, economy, gun violence, and to some extent immigration.
All right, we
so
shall
interesting.
see.
I feel entirely enlightened. Leslie Sanchez, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Great to see you.